welcome to the training webinar for today. Today is going to be a short webinar. It's going to be short because while the thing I'm talking about is very important, and I'm begging you with tears in my eyes to follow the best practices that I'm about to lay out, the topic itself is not complicated. In fact, it's relatively easy. So this is going to be one of the shorter training webinars, despite the fact that the topic is quite an important one, and that topic is versioning and implementing versioning on your Process Director applications. So let us begin by sharing my screen and taking a look at how versioning works in Process Director. Every object in Process Director, whether it's a form or a timeline or a folder, has a Versions tab that when you click on it will show you the versions that exist for that object in Process Director. Now it looks for some reason as if my screen, and pardon me, but it looks as if my screen is not entirely sized correctly. So either my screen is not sized correctly or we're looking at the wrong size in Zoom. Sorry about this, but I just want to be sure that we get our screen size properly. All right, so as I was saying, every object has a Versions tab. The Versions tab is extremely important. Even though every object has a Versions tab, you probably shouldn't version individual objects. You should probably version the folder that contains all of your application objects. Well, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. I have looked at some of your systems, and in some of your systems, I noticed that you put forms in one folder and timelines in another folder. And so I might have, I might look at it and see, 10 or 15 different timelines in one folder and then, 10 or 15 different forms in another folder. That is not the recommended way to organize your Process Director installation. You should be organizing your Process Director installation on the basis of applications. That means that all of the objects that work inside an application should be placed inside a parent folder. So, for example, I am in a folder called Versioning Sample App. And this folder contains any of the local business rules. That's another can of worms we'll have to get into. Any of the knowledge views that the app uses, the email template, the form, and the process timeline. They're all encapsulated into this single folder called Versioning Sample App. Business rules get a little tricky, as do business values, other global objects, for example, goals. Those get tricky because those are all, business rules can be local or global, but most of these things are global objects, which is to say they can be used by any application. Business values, for example, business values are universal. They can be used by any application in your system. So if you need data to go into any form from some external database, you can grab it via a business value. So the way that you organize your Process Director folders in the context of versioning, but in other contexts, is to have a standardized setup where if we look at our content list, we'll look over here on the left side of the screen. I have, custom tasks. Custom tasks are all global objects. Therefore, they go at the root of the Process Director partition inside their own folder. Now, at BP Logix, our convention is to have global objects like this always placed at the root level of the partition and to have their file names enclosed in square brackets. We've talked about this before. And of course, for custom tasks, the custom utilities, business values, some business rules, we'll talk about that in a second, drop-down objects, any data objects that you have, all of your data sources, they all have these folders at the root level that contain them. Now, business values do get a little tricky because sometimes a business value will not work outside the context of a specific form or a specific process timeline. They only evaluate items on that form or process timeline. Well, those wouldn't be global business values. Those would be local, or I'm sorry, not business values, business rules. Those would not be global business rules. They would be local ones. So in my versioning sample app, I would have a folder for business rules. I don't have any, but if I did, and they only worked inside the context of this application, I would place those business rules here. But a global business rule, which is to say a business rule that can be used by any form or any process timeline, any application on your system, it should have its own folder, again, at the root level of the partition for those global business rules that could be used by multiple applications. For example, I have this VP of Operations business rule. It happens to be a business rule that returns a specific user. In this case, it's Barb Stanley. And so anytime this rule is called, there is no condition on this user. It will always return Barb Stanley. So if I want to assign a task to the VP of Operations, I could use this business rule for that task assignment. Barb Stanley would always be assigned the task. I could use this in 10 or 15 different applications. And if Barb Stanley was ever replaced by someone else, she moved on, someone else took her place, all I have to do is go into this folder or this business rule and change Barb Stanley to whoever else. But in general, all of your applications should be encapsulated in a single parent folder, in this case, versioning sample app. There are a couple of reasons for this, one of which is directly relevant to our topic today, but one of the other reasons is for ease of import. If I have everything encapsulated into a single folder, all I have to do is import this versioning sample app folder from my development server to my production server, and everything will just import seamlessly, will be fine. Because I have a standardized rule of placing all of my global objects in these folders at the root level of the partition, whenever I import an application, Process Director already knows where those are. This is one of the reasons why, for example, we do not import and export, or if you do, all of the configuration will be stripped out, data sources. That way I can have a data source on my production system. Take a look at this one, customers. And this customer's data source on a dev system would point to some sample data that I don't mind exposing to anyone who works on the dev system to build things in Process Director. On my production system, I would still have a data source called customers. But this data source would actually be pulling data from the real world, my actual customer data from my ERP or CRM system, whatever it might be, so that I could pull real-time customer records out of that database to display in Process Director. They both have the same name, customers. They both reside in the same location, this data sources folder at the root. So when I do an import, any of my data in my form that pulls customer data to fill out the form or to fill a drop down, whatever you might be doing, it will look at this data source named customers. It will just pull different data. So my form on the dev system will pull test data. On the production system, it pulls real data. That does make my life way easier when it comes to importing applications. If I don't use this sort of folder organization, it makes my imports a lot harder, because if I make a change, say both to a process timeline and to a form, then I need to do two separate imports into two separate folders. And if I've made a change to both, then when I import my timeline, if I have any reference to anything that changed in the form, then that timeline import is going to fail. And it's not going to work until I import my form. And so once I import my form, okay, that might fail because something that didn't import with the timeline might be required on the form. So now I've got the form in and I got to go back and re-import the timeline. And so I might have to do multiple imports of the form and process timeline until all of those errors are cleared. That's way inconvenient, and you don't need to inconvenience yourself that way. The other thing that is important is relevant to our topic today, which is how we implement versioning. Now, as I said, every object in the system has that versions tab on the object definition. So I can go and create a version of that object. And you do need versions of all of your objects, but you don't want to do it at the versioning or at the individual object level. What we really want to do is do our versioning at the folder level, because that will create a snapshot of all of the folder contents. So if I have, these 5 objects in my application, I don't need to go into each object and create an individual version for my timeline and then one for my form and so forth. All I really have to do is just go to my folder, open the folder properties, and then I can access the versions folder here on this particular object. Because it's a folder, it will automatically snapshot everything that exists in the folder in its current state. So why do you want to do this? You want to have a canonical copy of your last work set up in a version. That way, if you go in and make a change, and that change turns out to be unfortunate, it messes something up, you accidentally delete a form control, what have you, and then you decide, oh, I really need that form control back, then fine, you can just revert to the versions. So in this folder, versioning sample app, we'll go ahead and create a new version. And to do that, I need to give it a version label. This is generally best done through a version number, but I would leave it up to your judgment as to how you want to label each of your versions. I'm just going to call this V1. I should probably put the V in lowercase. So this will be V1.0. And then I can create my object version definition. So in this case, it would be the initial version created on, initial version created on app completion. And once I've done that, I can now create my new version. When I have a version, and I might have multiple versions, let's make another one. Doesn't really matter. We don't have to make any changes. We'll say I updated the timeline, even though I didn't, and now we'll create a new version. Okay, so now I have 2 versions of this project, all of which have been saved at the folder level, irrespective of where I made the change. In this case, we'll assume that I made a change to the timeline and I created a new version. Now, what if in testing I decide that that is not great, that version has a problem with it, with the way that I've done the timeline, or maybe the thing that I've added we decided we don't need, so we should go back to the way it was. Well, now I could go back to my timeline and I could make all of the changes to the timeline and reverse what I did previously, or I could just select apply this version. This will overwrite whatever is in that folder with my new version. It basically re-imports my version. And in fact, we are looking at the import object screen. It took the original version 1 that I had, even though I just created version 2, and it said, okay, well, we need the We know it's in the versioning folder. Excuse me. So I need a timeline replaced. So I need this folder replaced first, versioning sample app. Then I need the versioning timeline. There's a set form data there. That's got to be redone. Knowledge views form, email template, business rules, all of these things get imported and replaced. So now I have a completely reset screen apparently. And we'll go back to training webinar, versioning sample app, and we'll open the properties of the folder. And so now I'm running version 1. Now, depending on what I did with version 2 and whether I want to keep that version or what have you, I can delete it. I'm not going to, but I could delete version 2 where I updated the timeline. Now, if you are reverting to a previous version, so it tells you up here at the very top that the most recently applied version is 1. So here's version number 1. That's our most recently applied version. Okay, great. Since that's the most recently applied version, I can go ahead and delete this faulty version so that I don't inadvertently, apply the version. In addition to applying the version, I can also download the version. And so I have the versioning sample app 1.xml. It will take the entire folder and save it down to my local hard drive as an XML file. It does XML rather than PDZ. All a PDZ is a zip file with the XML in it. It just zips it. This does not zip it, so therefore it just downloads it as a straight XML file. For those of you who've been a customer of Process Director for a fair amount of time, you may remember that before we downloaded everything, when we export items as PDZs now, before that, we just exported the XML file. And the XML file, because they were uncompressed, were rather larger than they needed to be. And you could always export as a zip file. And that way, instead of having the full file with its full file size, you could just export it as a zip. And then we would import the zip file, pull the XML out of it, unzip it. We decided to just forget about all of that. And we now just automatically put it in a zip file, and we created the PDZ file extension for Process Director to recognize it as a zip file with a zipped XML file instead. When you download it, it doesn't download it as a PDZ or zip file. It just downloads it as the plain old text XML file. So by downloading it, I have a copy of it that I can now store locally or store elsewhere. And if I ever need to go back to it, I can pull it out and I can just re-import it because Process Director will import the plain XML files just as they do PDZ files. So that gives me a way both of applying different versions and storing different versions by downloading them. Technically, I could also do an export of the folder and export it directly into the content list. I wouldn't have to go through this whole download thing, but that's just another option that it gives you. Versioning is especially important whenever we are bringing things in from the development server into our production server. So over on my development server, I have this versioning sample app. So I need to export this and re-import it into Process Director. So let me look at my export folder, my desktop folder. Nope, sorry, it's not desktop I want, it's downloads I want. I just want to be sure it's empty so that I know which file I'm exporting and importing. So we can take this version here, we can export it out of development. So we'll say this is my development server. And so this will export my versioning sample app. So we'll just go ahead and save it. Great. We'll now go back to our production server and We'll go into our versioning folder because I'm importing the entire folder. I want to overwrite this one. So we will now go to Import Objects. And we'll browse for my new versioning sample, and we'll import it into our production server. Okay, great. We have our new import there. So as soon as I do my import, it's going to erase all of my previous versions. I am, however, going to want to create a new version immediately. So we'll just call this V 1.0, and we'll call it version created on import. And I'm going to create that version. And because I'm doing it at the folder level, I did the whole versioning folder. That's the wrong folder. That's not the folder I wanted to version. Let's go to versioning sample app. Let's go to that folder. There we go. Now I've re-imported it, and I can see I still have my old versions on that folder. Sorry. I thought I had, when I imported it, I erased everything. I was just in the wrong folder. Okay, so again, well, let's go ahead and delete this version too. I said I wasn't gonna, but let's just go ahead and delete it. So this is version 1.0. This was the initial version created on app completion. And so now we'll go with V2 and we'll say imported on 12.4.25, and we'll create our new version there. So now I have two versions stored. One is the version that was created before I did the import, and the other was the version that I created as soon as I imported. Over time, what I'm hoping to do is to, every time I import, get a whole bunch of versions, because what that allows me to do, of course, is to reapply that version. So just as we saw a moment ago, when I got rid of the change to the timeline, let's say I do an import and I've missed something in my testing. This application has gone wonky because of the change that I made. Okay, fine. There's something wrong with the application. The new version doesn't work. I'm obviously going to have to work on the dev server to fix that, whatever the problem is on that version. But in the interim, I am going to want to apply this old version back to version 1. And so we've now replaced our imported object with version 1. I didn't make any changes to any of the objects because I don't really think it's necessary to go into that level of detail, but the versioning is important, especially on those imports. And as soon as you know what, let's get rid of all those system folders. That'll make my life a little bit easier. So what you want to do is have a version every time that you make a change anywhere in the object. Because whatever change you make, if you have a list of versions, you can always roll back to it. The point of having the versioning set up this way is for safety purposes. Normally, you wouldn't make a change directly to an object in production. In the real world, however, I know that most of you do, and most of you will go into production and you'll make some sort of change on your production server. Technically, you shouldn't do that, but in the real world, that's how things work. If you do that, no matter what it is that you change in your application, just as I illustrated recently with a change in the timeline, you should save that version. So anytime that you make a change, you should save it. Now, that doesn't mean that every little change you make has to have a new version. If you are doing a lot of revisions on a form, you're adding a new section, and also the timeline needs to change because that new section needs to be reviewed by, additional people. So I need to add new approval activities. That may be a fairly, extensive change. Well, I don't need to make a change to the objects, or I don't need to make a version every time I make a small change to the objects. Although on production, any change that you make, you should. And if you're going to do anything other than make a very minor change, perhaps correct a typo or something like that, you really shouldn't be doing that work on production. You should be doing it on dev and then importing it back into production. That should always be your work cycle. On production, you shouldn't be making any applications at all. Those should all be imported. You will, on production, occasionally have to go in and make new data sources and match them up with data sources that exist perhaps on dev. You might have to do that with business values, although generally you should be able to export business values from production to dev. There are some objects that you might need to change on your production server, but at the application level, that should always be done through imports and exports. Now, there are some things that help you outside of versioning. They're kind of quasi versioning, but I don't want you to get them confused with actual versioning. Versioning is canonical. If I do it here at the folder level, as I have done, then that is the canonical version of my project as it existed at that point in time. And I can always go back to that version and reiterate it if I need to. But there are some tools that help you at the object level. For example, if we open up a form, there is a history on that form. And that save history actually gives you the sort of the history of changes to that object. So as you can see, this object was created on 9/5/2024 when I first imported it. And then on 9/5 later on, I made some changes to this object. And so each time that I made a change to the form, it could be that I added a form field or deleted something or restyled something. It doesn't matter. When I saved my form template from the online form designer, or when I hit update because I made a change somewhere else in the form definition, that all gets recorded. That all gets saved. So on a day-to-day basis, on individual objects, I do have a log that I can go back and see what changes were made, or see when changes were made. It doesn't tell me what changes were made. It does tell me if it was imported, but if I just made a change, like for these 3 rows here, if I just made a change somehow to the form, it's not really going to tell me what change I made. It's not going to track the changes at that level, but at least I have a timestamp so I know when that change was made so that I can go ahead and I can roll back to that version, which would delete everything up here because I'm rolling back to this version. I can also download a version. How useful that is at the object level, I don't know, but you can download. Now, by default, Process Director wants to keep as much of this history as it can at the object level. However, you can, and well, it's hard to see here because it goes off at the bottom of the screen. So let me resize my form here. Let me go down here and we'll hit that all. And as you can see, I can either show everything or I can choose a hard limit for how far back I should keep the object change history. And like I said, that's a pretty useful feature to have to be able to make those changes. However, keep in mind that none of this is canonical. This is just every time I saved the object, or in this case, every time I imported the object, since that's what most of the changes are. And on production, This should pretty much be what you see on a production server because you should always be importing the objects from dev, as I said. But while I'm working, so if this was back here on, 9.5, well, let's just go ahead and make a change. There's no reason to just talk about it. We go in here, we have these three. I'm just going to add a new form field, I guess. Well, I tabbed too far out of it. So we'll add another form field and we will save and close the form. So I now have this new form field called input 7 that's inside my information section. The form will, it did not close. It's supposed to save and close. There we go. That's what I was expecting to see so that I could go back here into the history and, oh, it did save it. Saved it twice. I hit the save button twice. Apparently about 15 seconds apart, according to those timestamps. And now I have these two versions where I made the change. Now, let's say that was not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to make that change. I can now go back and look at the time that I made a change and I can roll back to it. Well, let's just roll back to this one, in fact, from 12/4/2025. So it was my most previous import. So I made this little change. I've decided I don't much like it, and I can roll back. So now I'm back to this version on 12/24 at 10:22 in the morning. And if I go back over here to edit, you can see that I'm now back to 3 instead of 4 form fields on this form. So super useful to be able to do this, but this is not a version technically. I mean, well, technically it is a version, but it's not really a formal version. This is just a save history log. It's super useful if you are making changes to the form and you do this and test it, and then you do another thing and all of a sudden it stops working, then you can just go back and find the last 2 or 3 things that you did and roll back prior to them and, attack it anew by reverting. So it's super useful on the development side, but do not depend on this for canonically tracking changes. You want to do that via versioning. Now, as I said, every object has a versions tab, so you can technically version at every level. There are some of you I know who actually do this, who actually do version at the object level and at the folder level. I don't, strictly speaking, think that that's necessary, because if you're making regular version updates at the folder level, you don't really need to version it at this level. However, having said that, there is a colorable argument that says if I version at both levels, then I can independently roll back different objects to a previous state without having to roll back all of the objects to a previous state. There is some merit to that argument, because it is conceivable that at the application level, I might only want to save a version prior to an export, and then I export that version, I import it into production, make a new production version. And so what I get on my production versions of the application at the folder level are each of the big imports that were done to make a change. So I have that higher level versioning done. But on a development server, you can make the argument that I might want to version at the object level, so in this case, my form, and I might want to make different versions of the form. And in fact, I might have multiple versions of that form that I create before I create the overall application version. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that it may be In the case of a form, it may be excessive because you do have the form history here. You can roll back to those previous saves on the form. The only downside is if you've made a manual save like we've done here in 2, 3, and 4, you don't really know what the change is. The only real clue that you have is the date and the time that you made the change. If you're coming back to this 3 or 4 days later and you have 15 different changes on that date, that may not be super helpful to you, and you'd have to roll back one version at a time until you found the version that you want that does not have whatever mistaken change you made. But again, this is not canonical. It's inconvenient to use. It might be easier whenever you go through a set of changes to go into the versions tab and just create a version of that form. But that would be something that would be different on a dev server where you might do that, vice on a production server where you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be going in and making changes to the form manually or making changes to anything else on the production server. So with a form, this is all great. We've got this history. It's certainly helpful to us. We just need to remember that it's not canonical. The versioning argument makes a lot more sense when you look at a process timeline, because process timelines do not have that history. So while that history is great to have on a form, it doesn't exist on a process timeline. So if you want to save the state of a process timeline or a business rule or business value or other object that does not have that object history, because that object history is a form thing, and it's super helpful on forms, but it doesn't exist anywhere else. So that's where a good argument can be made that, look, I made a change on the process timeline, and I would like to version my individual process timeline with that change. In that case, what your development process would be to, I'm going to make a change to my process timeline. I should have an existing version, but let's say I don't. Let's say that I've built this process timeline. It's done. It's the way that I like it. Once I'm at that state and I have my initial version of the process timeline, I'll have initial version and I can say, version made on creation and or creation. And now I've got my initial version. That's great. So from this point on, anytime that I go back in and I make a change to the process timeline, I add a timeline activity, or I remove one, or I change how some activities are assigned to different users, then that's fine. I would just say, in this case, new task assignments. And by the way, come up with your own labeling and descriptioning practices. I have been using V1 and V2, but like in the end, that's not super helpful. So you may want to use this type of labeling, or you may want to use like V1.1. So, however you consider a minor change would be a 0.1 change. A major change would go from V1 to V2. That might be useful so that, if I'm on version 2.3, I probably don't want to roll back to 1.9 because there's enough of a difference between those two forms that, it might be deleterious for me to roll back too far. You're going to have to come up with some convention on how you label and describe the object. So in this case, we'll just describe it as user task assignments change to groups. Wow. User task assignments change to groups. So this is version 1.1 now. So apparently I had hard-coded user task assignments. I discovered that's a bad idea. It's going to be a lot easier to manage via groups or alternatively via business variable or business rules. And now I've made those new changes and I have that new version. So as I make changes to the individual object, it can be useful to you from a development point of view to have individual versions of each of the objects to record your changes whenever you finally reach a point where you feel that those changes have now been properly implemented. And so you can just create versions. Since you don't have a history of your saved changes on, process timelines and other objects like you do with forms, versioning is really the only choice that you have for managing those. But at the end of the day, on your source server, and we'll say this is my source server. So I've switched machines now. So, okay, I have a version of the sample app that I am going to export. So what I need to do is go into my source server, go into the properties of the folder, go into the properties of the folder. Okay, not sure why it's not going into the properties of the folder. Okay, well, let's try versioning and properties. Okay. I am not sure why nothing is working here. Let us reload demo from scratch. Well, at the bottom of the screen, it's showing me where I need to go. There we go. Finally, it opened it up. Let me reopen the content list here just so that we can see where we are. And now we'll go into our versions. And so now that I'm going to do an export, now I want to go to my parent folder for my application and I want to create my new version. So we'll just call this v1.0 and, initial version for export to prod. So I'm going to create that version here because here's what I want over time. On my production server, I want to see a version which is my canonical version that got exported to production. So every time I do an export, I'm going to want to go onto my production server. I'm going to want to go into the parent folder, versioning sample app, and I'm going to want to create a version that encapsulates the application as it existed on this date and time when I exported that version to production. Once I've created that version, then I am good to go back up here to my versioning sample app and I can export it. And I've already exported it once, but let's save it over our initial versioning sample app, even though it's no different. Great, so now I've exported it, and then of course I'm going to want to go back over onto my production system, back into my versioning sample app folder, and well, actually I don't want to go into the folder yet. I want to go into its parent folder, and I want to do my import, grab my import from here, hit OK. It shows me my import report. Everything looks good there, so I know it imported correctly. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is go back here and call this v 2.1 minor changes from dev, and now I'll create my new version. So I'm actually going to be versioning twice. I'm going to be versioning on my dev machine whenever I do my initial export. Um, Here, so now this is the version that I exported, and then on my production machine, I'm going to have my import history and a version for each import. And so if 2.1 isn't great, I can always apply this version back to version 2 um, because this minor change maybe is not all that great. So I really don't want to keep it. I want to revert back to my original version. I am super irked that this keeps dragging me over to IT admin. So please note, anytime you're going to be making any changes on the versioning side, you really, really do need to look at that phrase right there to see what version you are running. So our most recently applied version, it says 2. So these are the version numbers, even though I'm using my own kind of versioning scheme in the label. It is the label. This is the actual version number. I'm running version 2. Version 3 isn't gone. It's still there. If I want to go back to version 3, I can. All I have to do is hit apply this version. If I want to go back to version 1, I can. The question then arises, on a production system like this one, how long should I keep a version? Because I can delete them. And by the way, these versions, they are taking up some amount of space on your system because they are being basically saved as XML files and stored inside your process directory database. So they do cause an increase in database size for as long as you keep them. There is technically no real limit other than your maximum database size on how many versions you can keep of everything. There is most likely, however, a real world limitation, a practical limitation on how useful it is to keep an item. So, for example, I have this version 1.0. That was the initial version that I created way back in the dim mists of time 30 minutes ago. I am now on version 2.1. In what conceivable universe, because the difference between version 1 and version 2, that's a major version change. It's probably has a big impact on the application. This is not, going from 2.1 back to 2. I mean, there might be some impact, but these changes from 2 to 2.1 are probably minor. The change from 1 to 2 is probably super big. And am I ever practically ever going to apply version 1, especially on a production system? When would I ever do that? Conceivably, on a dev system, if I wanted to go back and see what version 1 looked like, I could do that. I wouldn't. I'd probably export it, re-import it into another folder and, download it, because you have the download link, and then just import it into another folder and see what it looked like. But I'd probably never roll back to it. Now, maybe on a dev server, because you don't have a lot of action on a dev server, there's not a lot of users working on it. The database is always usually much smaller than production because you don't have 10 billion form instances running on that system. You can keep as many versions as you like. On a production server like this one, as a practical matter, since I'm probably never going to go back to version 1, ever, because the changes are too large and it would make all of my in-flight processes go, higgledy-piggledy, I probably am just going to want to delete this off of my production server. And what I want to keep as versions on my production server are those versions that I could reasonably expected to roll back to if I find something wrong. So I might only keep 2 or 3 versions on a production server, whereas on a development server, who knows how many versions of this I might end up actually having. Maybe I have 20 or 30. Now, the same kind of limitation does apply. I mean, realistically, how far back are you going to want to roll a development server? The reason I can see for keeping a bunch of past versions on a development server is because, well, I'd like to have a history of it. I might want to use an older version of this application as a template for something else. I can come up with a number of at least facially plausible reasons why I would keep a larger number of versions on my dev server. But again, realistically, are you ever going to roll back to them? The only reason that you would keep them, since you're probably never going to want to apply them, would just be to download them and re-import them to maybe serve as the basis of another app somewhere else on your system. Other than that, you have to use your own judgment on how long to keep all of these versions on your system. But it is super important to keep these versions, especially whenever you're doing the transfer from dev back over to production. No matter how good you test on your dev and your staging servers, there's an excellent chance that you missed something. You have a bad configuration somewhere. You've got a mistake in a timeline activity where you have a completion condition, but you forgot to click the default checkbox on one of your timeline activities or timeline activity results. And that activity is going to go into an error state automatically when that condition is true because you don't have a default result. And so the timeline can't complete the activity because there's no result because you didn't pick a default. So things like that are going to happen. If it does, you do at least want to be able to roll back to the previous version before you made the change. Now, look, in that case, and this is where, this sort of recommendation that we place on you, what you need to do is correct it on dev. So this is the official way of how you fix that. What you would do is you would roll back from version 2. Well, this should be the version that we're on. So I'll say this is our current version. So we are now, and it reloads the page. That I hate. We are going to have to discuss that with the engineering team. That rollback should work more seamlessly than it does. So let me go back to where I was. All right, so now my most recently applied version is 3. So this is my current version. Great. I've made this minor change from dev. Technically, our recommendation, and we'll talk about what you're actually going to do in the real world. In a minute. Our recommendation is that you immediately say, okay, this is a mistake. So let's go back from version 3, which is our most recently applied version. Let's go back and apply version 2. So we will apply version 2. And there our new version is applied. Why is it refreshing the entire window? Okay, cool. We went back to most recently applied version. It's now 2. All right, I've rolled back my change on production. So now I'm going to need to go into dev. I'm going to need to make whatever little changes I made to fix that error. We'll call this, V 1.1. And tell me why I'm making this version. We'll create my new version. Yay. So now I'm on, version 1.1 or version 2, if I just go by the integer number. That's fine. We'll hit OK, save everything. Now I can take my versioning sample app. Now I have to delete it. Delete, delete. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I delete that app? I didn't want to delete it. I wanted to export it. What am I thinking? Oh, this is not good. Well, well, well. Okay, fine. Let's pretend that what you just watched me do was export it. And now that I've made the change and I've exported it, obviously, I will go back over here to my versioning folder and I will re-import the application and its application folder. There's my import objects. There's my there's my application that you just watched me export. And okay, it's brought in the application. We're happy, happy. And now I go into my versioning sample app. I go into the folder properties. And now I go v2.2 and I say, and I know that the labels that I'm giving are different on both machines. They should probably be the same, but forgive me for not being perfectly accurate. Fix applied to TL activity result from dev. I can create that new version. And now my snapshot is version 4. Notice it says most recently applied version. It says none. What that actually means is because I just imported the project, what that actually means is I'm on the current import. And so I have not applied any version to this folder. So it means that what I'm actually showing in this folder is the most recent import of that folder. So the apply this version is not going to appear unless I specifically click apply this version for one of these prior versions that I have. So that's the process that we recommend that you go through if a minor change needs to be made. In the real world, what you're going to do is go here to the versioning timeline. You're going to go to approval one. You're going to go to the results. You're going to go to the approve. You're going to make it the default result. You're going to hit OK and you're done. And at this point, you'll go back over to, yep, I deleted the items. That's a good thing I had an actual import sitting there, or export file sitting there waiting to be imported. So then I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to go into dev and I'm going to open up this timeline, go to approval one, grab that approve result, and I'm going to click default result there. And I'm just going to do the same stuff on both machines and, hit OK to save it. Technically, you shouldn't, but it's going to take a lot less time to do that just to check a box on both prod and dev than it would take to go back to dev, check the box, export it, go back, re-import it, reversion it. Although, even for a change like this, if you're going to make that kind of change, you can, but you do really need to create a version of that change. Obviously, because I deleted it, I have no version. So let's call this v2.3 to try to rationalize what our version numbers are. And we'll just say changed TL activity result. I'm going to create that version there. And then obviously back on prod, since I've made a change to that timeline manually, I'm going to need to go back here. It's 2.2. I did it right. That is now version 2.3. So because I manually made the change here, I'm going to do a v2.3 here. And I'll just say changed TL activity and create the new version. You're not going to save any time on the version creation. And you are going to have to make that change twice, but it's probably a little faster if you just manually make the changes on both systems. It's a bad practice. You're going to do it anyway, I know, because I do it, even though I know I'm not supposed to. Technically, you should be making changes only on dev and only importing changes to production. But sometimes you run into these little changes and it's just quicker and more efficient. Like it's checking a checkbox. It's just going to be quicker and more efficient to do it twice, once on dev and once on prod. But you still need to make versions of that change on both machines so that I basically have the same configuration on both. The danger in doing it, sort of the cowboying through it and just individually making the changes, is that sooner or later you're going to be super busy. You're going to make the change on prod, and you'll think, I have to do this other thing. I'll go back and make the change on dev later. And then you never go back and make the change on dev because you get busy, it slides out of your memory, and then the next time you go to dev and do something else, you've got this misconfiguration that you never corrected on dev. You did it on prod, but you got busy. You never made it back to dev and made the correction there. So the next time that I re-import from dev, I'm going to re-import the same configuration error because I never went back and fixed it. This is why our recommendation is that you do all of your work in one place. Will it take slightly longer to do it in dev than to export it to production or export it from dev, import it to production, and then make the version? Yeah, probably, but the best practice is to do it that way. In the real world, I know you won't. So what that does is it puts the onus on you to be sure that if I make a manual change in prod, which again, I do not recommend, but if you do it, always be sure to immediately go to dev and make that same change. Of course, you might make a mistake when changing it in two places, and you might do something slightly different in one place in prod that you did on dev. Anytime that you work in more than one place, you run the risk of re-importing mistakes that you had previously corrected. You do want to avoid that. So make your changes appropriately. The nice thing is that even if I do a import and this change that I made manually, it gets overwritten with the old version. When I do my next import, okay, that's fine. I can change that pretty quickly. I can either go back to dev, make that configuration change, re-export it, re-import it, no harm done. Or if it is something that is more substantive and may take longer, well, then again, I can always go back. I can reapply my prior version and just keep that running in production until I fix whatever needs to be fixed on dev, and I can re-import it. So it's hard to overstate how important it is and how much time it saves if something goes wrong. So here's the problem with versioning that we run into, not only with customers, but internally as well. Making versions is a little bit of a pain. You have to go in, you have to write your label and your description, you create your new version, and then you have to change something else, and this create version thing becomes a little bit of a pain. Admittedly, it can be, especially if you are doing a lot of changes and you're making, like versions at the end of, every work session. Sure. However, having said that, it is a lifesaver if you make some sort of major mistake, because you can always roll back. This is my, please ignore my mistakes. We can pretend that this never happened page, because I can always go back and apply the previous version, return us to status quo ante, and then go and take whatever time I need to make the fix. This is your get out of jail free card page, as long as you are properly creating versions. The problem is, for some of us, I've been working in this product since 2014. All right, well, I have a tendency to kind of cowboy through stuff, and sometimes that does come back to bite me, especially if I have not properly versioned and I've now messed up something. I don't have a version I can roll back up to. I now have something that is erroneous running in production, and I can't fix it immediately. Now I have to expose my mistake to the rest of the organization because I don't have this never happened button, because I didn't keep proper versioning set up on my system. There's not much else to talk about for versioning, and thus I shall stop delivering manful thwacks to the dead equine of this subject. I cannot, however, despite the shortness of time it takes to explain the topic, I cannot overstate its importance. So please take extra special care to get versioning done right on your system, so that in the event something bad happens, you can click the "This Never Happened" button, and we can wait until a proper fix is there in a new version that you can then re-import, and you can return everybody to the way things were before some mistake was made. Versioning is important. It is, especially in some high volume applications and high visibility applications, really is a lifesaver. Being able to just instantly revert back to the way things were, so that you can create the fixes that you need to create. We have one more webinar this year. Actually, we have two more. We have a feature spotlight webinar on Tuesday, and then we have the last training webinar of the year, indeed the last webinar of the year, next Thursday, and we will then go on our holiday hiatus. So I'll look forward to seeing you on Tuesday and or Thursday. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. So long.